for a month or 6 weeks and sometimes less. So some of the places he describes, he never says exactly where he is, but from the way in which he describes what he perceives, you can gather whether he is in Switzerland or in India or in Ohio or in England, wherever he happened to be, or Paris. I think those are the places that are described here. So I don't know where I will start. I went through last night and marked a few passages. Let's start with something very simple. Well, it's all simple, but here he is in Paris, and staying somewhere in Paris, where he gave a couple of talks, and he suddenly looks on a piece of grass, a lawn, and a rose bush, somewhere in the middle of the city, in a little park. A lawn, but he was brought up in England, where traditionally it's the old-fashioned, they say that a lawn needs to be tended and cared for a long, long time. So that's the traditional British belief, and it's only after 100 years or so that the lawn really becomes perfect. So you have to cut it and roll it and look after it, and so this kind of, that's what he also talks about. So here he is somewhere in the middle of Paris, and suddenly he looks at this little piece of lawn and a rose bush. There was a beautifully kept lawn, not too large, and it was incredibly green. It was behind an iron grill, well watered, carefully looked after, rolled and splendidly alive, sparkling in its beauty. It must have been many 100 years old. Not even a chair was on it, isolated and guarded by a high and narrow railing. At the end of the lawn was a single rose bush, with a single red rose in full bloom. It was a miracle, the soft lawn and the single rose. They were there apart from the whole world of noise, chaos and misery. Though man had put them there, they were the most beautiful things, far beyond the museums, towers, and the graceful line of bridges. They were splendid in their splendid aloofness. They were what they were, grass and flower and nothing else. There was great beauty and quietness about them, and the dignity of purity. It was a hot afternoon, with no breeze, and the smell of exhaust of so many cars was in the air. But there the grass had a smell of its own, and one could almost smell the perfume of the solitary rose. So something that is ordinary one would completely overlook, because if you're in Paris, there are many more interesting things to look at than a little piece of lawn and a rose bush. But instead of focusing and writing about the spectacular things that you would usually focus on and look at in Paris, he never describes anything spectacular of that kind. He looked at this little, seemingly insignificant lawn and the rose bush and perceived it against that his inner stillness, and saw that intense aliveness which he's attempting to put into words. And it's as presence arises, you don't necessarily look for the spectacular. You see the extraordinary in the ordinary through presence. Without presence, to keep it alive, interesting, you need to look for something extraordinary. So that's why you're always somewhere else, because usually in the present moment, if you're not present, it's not that interesting, unless you're having some drama. So you're looking for something bigger, something greater, some big thing to come into your life, continuously missing all the little things of which your life really consists. It's all little things. But if you continuously ignore the little things, then you ignore something very vital, the miracle of life all around you. So you may find this yourself when you, as you become present and you walk around, there's an acknowledgement of that extraordinariness of life, even in its seemingly most insignificant manifestations. And in fact, you become more interested in those things than in the big things. Often Krishnamurti would wake up in the night, early hours of the morning or night, like 4 o'clock, 4:30, and suddenly would go into intense presence, and he would perceive whatever was there to be perceived in the intense alertness. And he could be for an hour without any thought, just totally still. Here's a description of what happens when he's woken up by the cry of a bird in the middle of the night. It was long before dawn when the sharp cry of a bird woke up the night for an instant, and the light of that cry faded away. The light of that cry. Oh, by the way, he never uses the word I once in the whole notebook. He sometimes says one instead of I. One felt hot. Or sometimes he says you. You felt hot when he means I. It was long before dawn when the sharp cry of a bird woke up the night for an instant, and the light of that cry faded away. And the trees remained dark, motionless, melting into the air. It was a soft, quiet night, endlessly alive. It was awake. There was movement. There was a deep stirring with utter silence. Even the village next door, with its many dogs always barking, was quiet. It was a strange stillness, terribly potent, destructively alive. It was so alive and still that you were afraid to move, so your body froze into immobility, and the brain, which had awakened with that sharp cry of the bird, had become still, with heightened sensitivity. It was a brilliant night with the stars in a cloudless sky. They seemed so close, and the Southern Cross was just over the trees, sparkling in the warm air. That was obviously in India somewhere. So reading this is an invitation, really, to join him in that state of consciousness, of that alert stillness or presence. And not only as you read or listen, when I read it to you, it may also help you to, as you go about your life, to pay more attention to the seemingly insignificant, the little things, the miracle that's hiding in everything.